Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for May 27th, 2021. I'm going to touch on two topics today which are interrelated. The first one has to do with the so-called infrastructure bill that's being fought over between the White House and the Democrats and Republicans in the Congress. I want to point out that what they're talking about as infrastructure is not only completely inadequate, but is not even really infrastructure. And let's take a quick look at this. The Biden administration initially proposed a $2.3 trillion expenditure over, I believe it's 6 to 8 years. Then he dropped it to $1.7 trillion. The Republican counteroffer from Shelley Moore Capito, the senator from West Virginia, is for $1 trillion over 8 years. Now, that's not going to pay for much other than filling a few potholes. The problem with infrastructure in the United States is that we've been operating from an old platform which is deteriorating. When you talk about infrastructure, you have to look at it from the top down. What's the purpose of infrastructure? It's to facilitate a more efficient, productive process that allows the physical economy to increase its productivity through access to adequate or even surplus electricity, to water management such as flood control, but also clean water, new pipes. Also included in this, transportation, hospitals. The idea of infrastructure as simply a transport system is completely wrong. If you go back to the founding of the United States, what Hamilton had in mind with his proposals for infrastructure was something that would facilitate making the productivity of each worker employed higher, increase the productivity of every single worker by cheapening the cost of production. It was manufacturing, but it was also ports, canals, roads, bridges. Today, this includes airports, it includes high-speed rail, it should include space exploration. But a platform of infrastructure is based on the development of new technologies that can cheapen the cost overall of what you're trying to accomplish. Now, if you're trying to cheapen the cost by not building it, you're actually increasing the cost because of the delays in deliveries, the breakdowns of systems, the collapse of an electric grid, as we saw in Texas this last winter, which costs lives. It's not just a money question, it's human life. And when you look at the great infrastructure projects in this country, in the United States, you go back to what Franklin Roosevelt did with the Tennessee Valley Authority, with the Bonneville Authority in the Northwest, with the completion of the Hoover Dam project in the southwest of the United States. You look at Texas with the improvement of water management through the building of lakes. You look at the draining of swamps. These are things that improve the quality of the land, that increase the overall productivity of agriculture and industry. Now, the proposals that are being made by Biden have nothing to do with that. It has to do with this fake green agenda, which is based on the fake science that human activity is what's causing global warming. And that therefore we have to stop producing carbon. We have to go to a net zero-based carbon system, which means no production, no building. It's essentially a feudal system. And by feudal, I mean like the Middle Ages, where people live in villages, small communities where they are dependent on sun and wind for their power. But these systems are not adequate for a population of 7+ billion people on the planet. This is provable quite easily. And we see the fact that we have not developed the healthcare infrastructure. We see the effects of that with the current pandemic. So the idea that we're going to somehow go on the cheap or have a public-private partnership, or that we can't afford it because it costs too much. Well, How can we afford to bail out the huge banks and speculators? Why do we have money, as in 2008, to bail out the very institutions that caused the bubble in mortgage-backed securities? Today we've got an everything bubble, a credit card bubble, a student debt bubble, a car loan bubble, a housing bubble, a corporate debt bubble, a bond bubble. All these bubbles are funded by cheap flow of credit from the central banks. Well, what does that have to do with maintaining an economy? Well, the point is that they're saying we cannot afford to put money into those areas that are necessary, housing, healthcare, and so on, because we have to sustain the banking system. When Eric Holder was Attorney General, he argued that we couldn't prosecute the swindlers who caused the mortgage bubble in the first decade of the 2000s because they were systemic banks. They were too important. If they failed, it would bring down the whole system. Well, it was their fake or their phony policies, their buildup of a speculative bubble from which they profited. That was the cause of the problem. Not the fact that people wanted housing, not the fact that people wanted industry and jobs and that we needed transportation. So infrastructure has to be seen the way LaRouche saw it, as platforms which enable you to increase the technological input to your productive process. Now let me give you an example of the insanity we face. There's a man named Tom Kiernan of something called the American Rivers, which is tied to the World Wildlife Fund, the original anti-human, so-called environmentalist organization. And what he's saying is that we should use the infrastructure bill, Biden's infrastructure bill, to tear down the 4 large hydroelectric dam systems in the Northwest. Because what the American Rivers Group argues is that we must prevent human interference with the rights of free-flowing rivers. That is, the right for a river to have no obstruction, no change, no reversal of where it's going, of direction, that this is an injustice to the flowing of the rivers. And it's also an injustice to salmon. So they're talking about this in the Columbia Snake River system, which is the world's 3rd largest grain exporting gateway. The idea of dam deconstruction as part of infrastructure is absolutely nuts. And yet that's what we're dealing with the Green New Deal. So when you look at this question, the debate over infrastructure, it's not about who's going to protect the economy, who's going to protect nature. It's about who's committed to destroying human civilization for the benefit of a handful of speculators tied to the Wall Street, City of London financial system. That's the update that I have for you today. Tomorrow will be Friday. We have your questions. Send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. See you then.